And that was when I started to kind of discover, I suppose, the world of personal development, and almost started to coach my way into a better mental state. Within a year, I've been made redundant because graduating in 2007 was not a good time to go into the grad scheme that I chose. And, you know, the 16 of us, my kind of pathway into adulthood started in that second year of university, where I gradually became avoidant and at one point locked myself in my university dorm for 2 weeks.
Hello grown-ups, welcome to this week's episode of A Beginner's Guide to Being a Grown-Up, where we interview Lee Chambers, who is the founder and CEO of Male Allies UK. And what we get to hear from him in this week's episode is the highs and lows of his educational experience, setting up his own business, getting made redundant at an early age, and what drove him to create Male Allies and his experiences along the way. So please join me to welcome Lee to the podcast. Lee, thanks for joining us today. I'm going to kick off with a question about your younger years. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey into adulthood?
So, pleasure to be with you, Sam. And my journey into adulthood, it's interesting reflecting back. I think it started when I was born in 85 on a council estate in the north of England. My parents were teenagers when they had me, and I was, best to say, a bit of a surprise. But I had a really kind of interesting childhood growing up in a majority white area as a black boy. Faced a little bit of racism, but also a little bit of hope. I had some adults who were really kind of behind me and felt that I would achieve something, as well as a few who probably doubted. But that meant I actually became the first one in my extended family to get to university after a bit of a challenging time in college. And I was one of those kids who was at college because I had potential, but also my parents found the EMA really helpful. So kind of coming from that lower socioeconomic background, I kind of understood the value of education, but I really, really struggled at university. And it was that time where I was trying to expand, went out to the city, really had to start to think about who I was, started to look out more and think, is there anyone like me who sounds like me out there doing the things that I want to do? And very quickly came to a realisation that there wasn't anyone who looked like me, sounded like me, and was going to go on a pathway that I wanted to carve out for myself. I would probably say I'm a supervillain individual. I'm part entrepreneur, part scientist, and part philosopher. But the only, people who looked like me that I could see in my vicinity were people in sports, rapping, movies, all in entertainment or activity, and very, very little in business, in science, in kind of advocacy. So I did have a bit of an identity crisis, and that actually led me to start to struggle with my mental health. I couldn't find the answers within me. I didn't really have the emotional intelligence or the self-awareness to explore. I then looked externally and couldn't find those sources of inspiration, those role models. And I think my kind of pathway into adulthood started in that second year of university, where I gradually became avoidant and at one point locked myself in my university dorm for 2 weeks. Oh, wow. And before the days of tracking and everyone being on the phone 24/7, I was actually just able to hide in my dorm until security came, broke the door down and extracted me, and my parents took me home. So when I reflect back, I think it was at that point that actually it kind of hit me that, life is going to be quite challenging. You're going to have ambition, you're going to have desire, you're going to have a vision, but also there's going to be plenty of barriers and a real journey to understand who you are when all society's expectations are stripped off you. And I think that has then, been a catalyst over the next 20 years for lots of ups, a lot of downs, a lot of mistakes, a lot of learnings, 5 different careers in the space of 20 years, and some real kind of full circle moments on that journey as well.
So you said, it's really interesting and obviously a really hard start to your adulthood. So you said you've done 5 different careers, and obviously you really struggled when you were at university. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of that journey of getting your mental health in a better state, and then what sort of careers you went into and how you ended up doing what you do today?
Yeah, so I think if I'm to even start what I was studying at university, I decided to study international business and psychology because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And that gave me a wonderful choice of units, from communication styles to marketing and finance to languages to comparative politics of Western democracies. Wow, fascinating. But it did kind of align to the fact that I wasn't fundamentally sure what I wanted to be. And I think going on that journey to explore also made me explore myself and find that I didn't really have the answers I was looking for, or the skills to ask better questions yet. I actually spent a year at home after that, kind of de-enrolled from university to try and get myself into a better place. And that was when I started to kind of discover, I suppose, the world of personal development, and almost started to coach my way into a better mental state, but also into a more forgiving and compassionate place. Because I was very harsh on myself. I had really high standards. And obviously being the first one in my extended family to go to university, having parents that I'd put hopes and dreams and some pressure as well to achieve and to be something and to get a profession and do the things that they couldn't because I came along when they were so young, kind of placed a lot of weight on me. And I was able to actually unpack some of that weight to realise I might have failed at going through this growth period, but I wasn't a failure. And actually, I could take some of the lessons of things over the past few years and think, how could I do them differently? And how could I take some lessons and learning from the things that didn't go to plan or didn't go as well as I expected? And just gradually building that up over a year allowed me to actually go back to university in a much better kind of state of mind, not only mentally and emotionally, but in terms of my openness to embrace a learning experience that wasn't linear. And I actually managed to graduate and then get a grad scheme at a national bank, which was wonderful. For someone like me from a low socio-economic background, was seen as a real achievement. So much so, Sam, that my parents took me to Burton's to buy my first work suit. That incredibly proud moment.
Yeah.
I'd like to say I've still got that suit somewhere today, but I don't. It don't fit anymore. But it was really interesting because it was really seen as success to people around me. But I was still, in many ways, curious about where this journey would go. And where the journey went, well, within a year, I'd been made redundant because graduating in 2007 was not a good time to go into the grad scheme that I chose. And, the 16 of us that had been taken on all got made redundant. And I remember at the time thinking, this is not fair. This pathway that I've had in front of me with professional training being funded and all this, it's been taken away and it's not fair. And then I realised some of the people who'd been mentoring me and supporting me, they had 25 years experience. They didn't have any comparative jobs to go to, but they had families, they had mortgages, they had holidays. And I was just at the start. Maybe I could redefine what I actually was. But it did mean I had to move home. And my parents had sold up in that year and downsized because they didn't think I was coming back. So I actually got the boiler room at the back of the house as a place to kind of sleep on a mattress on the floor because the shape of the room didn't fit a single bed frame. It was chastening in some ways.
Yeah.
But like many of us probably have been on our journey, a time of desperation actually becomes a time of inspiration. And that kind of charted out the course that I took going forward. So I ended up taking a job in local government because I needed to pay my way. That didn't allow me to change the things that I wanted to change. So that's when I set up my e-commerce business, not really knowing just how much that would grow and how quickly it would grow, and just how I'd suddenly, without realising, just hit a market adoption point and kind of rode on that wave, built a software arm, started trading across Europe. I'm a young leader, building teams, building functions, learning on the go, making a lot of mistakes. And then all of a sudden I lose the ability to walk over the course of a weekend. And suddenly I'm stuck in a hospital bed with a lot of time to reflect. That was 11 years ago now. And in the 11 years since, I've learned to walk again. I've been a stay-at-home dad for a few years. that was the most effective leadership and development training course I've ever been on. And coming out the other side of that, just decided I wanted to do something different, exited the company that I'd built and that I'd kind of sat as an advisor on while I was a stay-at-home dad, and decided to tackle the world of workplace wellbeing and inclusion, just after appreciating how important health is after having my own challenge in such a big way, and then starting to realise through my time as a stay-at-home dad and through doing my master's part-time at the same time, the reality of women in the workplace. And I never even really considered that, even though I had a team with 33 women on it. So it just made me think about the things I could have done better and want to take that forward and actually make a systemic change in society. Through my own lived experience and through the things that I've gradually seen that have widened my own perspective on the world. Because I can tell you, 20 years ago, I thought I was quite worldly wise, but my perspective was so narrow, I could barely see any other streets than the one pathway in front of me.
I mean, what a journey that you've had. I'm really interested by the resilience that you've clearly shown over the years, having to leave university due to mental health challenges, but, finding a way through, and I think probably more self-awareness than I think you give yourself credit for, given how young you still were. Then getting made redundant, and that can be devastating at any age, but to happen so young, even if you can rationalise it because of what was going on in the world economy, must still have knocked you sideways and having to go home. And I think that reflection that you said around that having failed at something didn't make you a failure, I think, where did that, do you know where that came from, where that kind of real presence of mind to be able to rationalise came from?
So I think, I've fallen into numerous potholes over the years, and had things happen that were more due to external circumstance than my own actions. I've also had things that have gone really badly due to my own actions. And I suppose one big thing, Sam, is I can talk about things that have happened and talk about the process that I went through. But the brutal honesty is, at the time, you are like, it's not fair. I wish this didn't happen. Why me? Why now? That's a natural human feeling to think, well, I just don't think this is very fair, is it? And I think that in itself, we almost need to have that reaction and process that. And what I actually found is that the best way for me to process that reaction was to write down how I felt and talk to people about it. And that was what actually kind of got me into a better place, to be able to get out of my own head, get it onto some paper, and then bounce it off someone else and see how they perceived it. And that was really important for me when I was going through that year of kind of rebuilding, that I actually, I read a book and it talks about journaling. Now, journaling nowadays, 20 years on, is, well, there's 72,000 different types of journal you can buy on Amazon nowadays. It's like, it's a phenomenon. Back then, I mean, I don't think it even had the name journaling. I don't think it was even branded in that way. But the core concept of write down what's going on in your head and how you're speaking to yourself, read it back and think, are you being a bit harsh? And then bounce it off someone else and see if they think it's being a bit harsh. And then you might realise that actually there's a difference between beating yourself up and giving yourself some discipline and some accountability. It's two very different things, but can almost feel like the same thing. So I think practicing that skill, and then the associated skills of, how do you deal with things that don't go to plan? And I almost had like a consideration as well, where I mapped out what I'd done and what I hadn't done, and looked and thought, what could I have done better? Or what would I probably not do in hindsight? Or what can I learn from what I did? Because how I see it is, there's a little bit of treasure in everything that doesn't go to plan. There's something in there that you can take forward to the next time you try. And I think part of being like that kind of partial scientist, partial entrepreneur as a mindset is that I'm very experimental. So I was willing to see.
So it's such an interesting journey that you've been on, Lee. And my reflection from listening to you is, I love your thought around there's a little bit of treasure in every failure. or every time something doesn't go to plan, I think is brilliant. And you were definitely an early adopter of journaling and kind of speaking therapy, clearly. If we go back to your 18-year-old self, quite a lot of pressure by the sounds of it from the family to kind of go to university, do well. And you said you'd had a bit of a challenge at college anyway. And we know from what you've told us, you really struggled at university to begin with. If your younger self could see you now, what would they recognise in you? What would still be really recognisable to them?
So I have to think back to my 18-year-old self and think, what still aligns, what still resonates. I think it's still that kind of search and almost that feeling of being, part entrepreneur, part scientist, part philosopher. I still think I embody that today. I knew that about myself, even though I couldn't see that out there as something that was possible. And I think the thing that really aligns is that I've kept that essence of me throughout every part of the journey, every different career switch, going from not being a father to being a father, kind of moving through life. I've never really lost that essence of who I was. And I think that, I don't tend to think about that very often, but I think it really, truly guides what I do and keeps me in alignment. And what I will say is that when I was building my business, I started to get pulled away from that in the sheer, ambition for growth and the vision of success being very kind of ratio, metric based, started to pull me away from the essence of who I was. And I didn't really see it because I was drifting. And becoming ill really brought that back into alignment in a big way. But it's really funny to look back and think 22 years later, I've still got that essence of a soup of an individual. I've never truly specialised into just one thing. And I've been able to move with a level of fluidity across different parts of my life. And I've got the most kind of spiky, squiggly career path ever. But I always knew I wouldn't have something linear, even though I went into that finance grad scheme thinking, oh, well, this might just be the one pathway. I kind of knew when I was younger I was going to be all over the place, sometimes in a bit of an unorganised and chaotic way, but some ways in a way where I was exploring and experimenting like a modern-day pirate.
I love that as an analogy. So if we keep your 18-year-old self, and you've stayed very true to that, as you say, if they could see you now, what would they be absolutely blown away by?
That's a good one. So, one thing that really stands out is when I was 18, I had a bit of a crisis of confidence, and I basically choked on stage in front of 300 other students. And that really hit me because prior to that, I'd been considered to be quite able to speak in front of audiences, quite good at discourse, quite good at debating, and very articulate in how I delivered points. And choking on that stage in front of all my peers really hit me and made me think that actually I'm not as good at this as I think I am. And it's a little like kind of, I compartmentalise that a little bit and put it to the back of my mind. Lee should probably work behind the scenes. Speaking's maybe not his thing. And it took me 15 years to get back on the stage after that moment. So what my younger self would be really kind of, infused about is the fact that I've, taken that limiting belief that actually maybe I should work behind the scenes and gradually worked on it to a point, where I have now stood in front of thousands of people and spoken. And, I've done that internationally and been able to deliver, insightful research in a actionable and practical way that people can understand, and even got an academic fellowship in the ability to communicate, the work that I've done down. And that takes me to America to do some great things and have a great cohort of people to go on that journey with. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, is the fact that I kind of took that I'm scared of standing on a stage and maybe it's not for me, into actually I'm going to fully own that and actually realise that I'm a lot better at it than I probably thought I was. And it's a skill. You practice it and, you do continue to get more ability to do it well And it's not something to be afraid of, actually. It's part of who I am. And expressing yourself is also part of who you are too. I think one thing that might surprise my younger self is how I dress now. Because my younger self dressed actually really conservatively. And my younger self had listened to someone who said, don't think about what you dressed in, because that takes cognitive processing away from the things that matter. So at one point I did have that full tech bra wardrobe of black t-shirts and jeans. And now I'm a little bit more flamboyant, a little bit more colourful, and I've embraced slightly crazy eyewear. Whereas the old me was like, oh God, got called Specky Four Eyes at school so many times. I'm just going to wear bland glasses that, people don't even notice. And now I'm like, yeah, where's the colour and the big frames at?
It feels like you've really found like your inner power and that real inner confidence that your 18-year-old self was lacking. And I can say that you have some fabulous outfits. I saw you at a recent award ceremony dressed from head to toe in, I think it was sequined green, which was amazing. And you really own it. So I think you have clearly been on that massive journey from that younger age. And I think for a lot of us at 18, standing out is terrifying. And I think it sounds like as you've gone through all of those different stages of failure and picking yourself up and self-learning, you've really come into your own and are now just like, this is who I am.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think that, we all get more mature in our ways to navigate that. I definitely think that as we almost everyone I meet, as we get older, we actually care less about what other people think. Realise that generally other people are a bit too focused on themselves and worrying about what other people think about them. And actually, to just be our bold, authentic selves is really, really powerful. And not in the kind of the manufactured authenticity of the social media era that we're in, where it's like, oh yeah, be authentic, but you're actually building a personal brand, trying to portray yourself a certain way. Which is something that kind of riles and pushes my buttons a bit. But actually, that genuine expression of you is what I'm really passionate about, and it's great to see people become more unapologetic about that, especially those from marginalised groups who again feel like they've probably been told at some point in the journey, if you stand out, it's just another thing that's going to get you picked off, another thing that's going to be an additional barrier, another thing that's going to make you more exposed or vulnerable to potentially facing, biases and things that happen in our systems. So it is, powerful to step into that and own it. And it's really funny how the essence of me as a person has never really changed, but my ability to embrace that essence and take it out to the world has gradually become stronger. I've become more capable, and I've become more bold and courageous enough to do that as the years have gone by.
So that brings me to a really good question around the decisions that we make. What's the best decision you've ever made?
Ooh, the best decision I ever made was to step out of my company operationally, take a strategic role and become a stay-at-home dad. So when I did that in 2015, it was really interesting to hear people's perspectives because I was obviously very senior. I built the company and, I'd been ill and had that year out, brought an interim MD in to replace me. And there was an expectation that I'd go back and lead on the North American expansion. And I just looked and I thought, what does that mean? Sorting Europe out in the morning and working till midnight to cover Pacific time zone. What's going to happen to bedtime? Am I going to even see my kids? And I've obviously gone through that period of learning to walk again alongside my newborn daughter and, taking her first steps with her. And that's what had driven me to get back on my feet. I've gone through that process of really appreciating just how powerful it was to have someone else to do something for, and to be connected to something much bigger than myself. And I just realised that actually did I want to go back on that massive scaling hamster wheel, knowing that if I was going to go and do it, I was going to go all in, because you have to commit to it. You can't scale anything if you're not going to commit to that 100% drive and effort. And just taking a very bold decision and saying, no, I don't want to. I'm not in that mindset. I'm not in that place, and I can't give it what I'd want to give it. I want to give that to my children. And I got called a loser, got told it was career suicide. I got asked what my wife was doing. I got told, oh, you'll be bored, mate, you'll be back in 2 weeks. But I also got people saying, what an amazing role model. You know, the bond you'll have with your children, you'll never get any other chance to have that. And, you know, just go and embrace it. And it was so powerful for me because I took that decision and it just opened my eyes to how caregiving is valued in this country. And I went and joined my local baby and toddler group thinking that I was going to get some respite, because looking after 2 toddlers, it brought me to my knees most days. Like the mental load, like by 4 o'clock on some days, I was exhausted. And every time I left the house, I forgot something. And I was like, I've run an organisation, I've got this massive to-do list in my head, I'll be fine. And I was like, geez, like it's much easier to negotiate with my team than it is these 2. Boy, like, but the most powerful thing was, you know, going into that baby and toddler group thinking I was getting some respite. I was the only father in the room, and there was no grandfathers either. So there was just mothers and grandmothers to listen to and to learn and to get a very different perspective on the world, and to see those that had careers in all different industries, but how pretty much every woman had had something happen that kind of rubbed up against my values and made me think that actually that's not fair. And that sent me off down the rabbit hole of, you know, what is it like for women in the workplace that I don't perceive, that I don't see. That's kind of gone very much into my journey today around male allyship and how do we, you know, close gender gaps, and how do we get more men involved in inclusion, and how do we just reframe, you know, things and amplify the fact that it's actually very beneficial to men to build this skill set, and a more gender equal society is much better for everyone. So yeah, the biggest decision and best decision I ever taken was to actually be like, yeah, I'm going to be that stay-at-home dad, break those societal expectations, and actually realise there's so much for not taking the expected path and not just conforming to the stereotypes that are around.
And I think that's so powerful, because you're effectively walking in someone else's shoes and learning whilst walking in your own shoes, right? And it's an experience that very few men have, partly because society, as you say, you have people saying you're a loser, you're going to be bored while you're doing it, whilst others advocating for you. This might be linked to that time in your life, might be completely different, but what's the best piece of advice that you've been given that you ignored?
Ooh, that's a really good question. On reflection, I was given a piece of advice early in my business journey to get the right people around you early on, and to not try and do it all yourself. But because I'd made approaches to some people early in that journey and kind of been told, yeah, market opportunities there, you know, your forecasting looks good, you look like you've got some structure and you've got a vision of where you're going, but you're going to struggle because you're young, you're inexperienced, you've got a bit of an attitude, you've not got a lot going on in terms of your network, you've not been shaped by industry, you know, you've not got like that funding credence, like you're probably going to even struggle to get anything from a bank in this climate. Like I had that, you know, I'd spoke to people who'd instilled a level of doubt within me. And on that business journey, I ended up not taking that advice of getting good people around you early and getting mentors and people who'd, you know, gone through things. And actually, I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to prove that I could. And that made me more insular. It made me less expansive. And it made me not as trusting of other people around me. And the truth is, I should have gone a bit further within that. I should have searched more for people who could provide that guidance and insight. And I shouldn't have tried to do it all on my own to prove people wrong, because that was powerful fuel, but it was negative fuel. And I reflect back now and realised, you know, it would have been very, very helpful for my own development as an entrepreneur. It would have helped me see some risks that I didn't notice. It would have helped me see some opportunities that I didn't notice either. And it would have helped just kind of streamline my own effectiveness during that period. Because I have no doubt that the way I was working in ineffective and inefficient ways didn't help when it came to becoming ill. I also had to go through a whole period of trying to extricate myself from everything, which was painful, but it has to be done. And I'm glad I did that, because it would have been a lot more painful had I have had to do that when I was in hospital bed. But yeah, I can reflect back and think I should have listened. Obviously, young, hard-headed, determined to prove people wrong, young black lad wasn't going to play with that, because there's no one like me in the industry. But actually, I should have listened, and who knows what would have happened if I had. But in some ways, it's still a part of my journey that I didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think every time we do something that takes us down a different path, it teaches us something, and you end up down the path you're supposed to take, even if you said, as you said, I think you called it a squiggly career. I think the best careers are squiggly careers, because it makes you the most rounded and you learn so much more about all those different experiences. One of the things we really like to get our guests to do is give our listeners a challenge. So we've talked about journaling, we've talked about your struggle with mental health and learning to get through that, starting a business in your 20s and what you learned from it just post, major financial crisis around the world, your pivot into being a stay-at-home parent, and then your pivot into leading on male allies. So I'm sure there's lots of different places within there you could set a challenge. But what if you could set one challenge to our listeners, something to do for themselves, what would that challenge be?
I'm going to be a bit provocative here, Sam.
Excellent.
Yes. So my challenge to you is to go and look at your bookshelf, look at your suggested YouTube algorithm, and look at your social media feed. Start with your bookshelf if you've got one, and just go through your bookshelf and note down by tally how many authors are male and how many authors are female. Because what's fascinating is there's a gender content gap that people don't really like to talk about. When you consider that it wasn't that long ago that 97% of leadership books published were by men. How does that influence the very world that we perceive, the way that we see things in the workplace, out in society? Men are much more likely to pretty much consume all male content. Male written books, male led podcasts, male guested podcasts, male created videos. And women have a much more balanced, much more balanced way they consume. And there are reasons for that. But it means that you can look at your bookshelf and think, how much gender intelligence am I pulling from this? Is it very one-dimensional, very one worldview, very male gaze in its kind of perspective? And it's something that I did a few years ago, and even realised that, me supposedly being fairly aware of these things, just had a male lean on his bookshelf. A lot more books were by men than women. And I was just like, how can you learn if you never read anything from someone else's perspective? So my challenge to you is, look at that algorithm, look at your bookshelf. Is it all the same thing by all the same kind of people? Mix it up, because your algorithm will feed you the exact same thing over and over again. It will never put you into a situation where you hear something different, unless it purposely does it to try and trigger you and make you angry. So you be the master of your technology and the master of your bookshelf, and go out there and bring a bit of difference in there, because difference is advantage.
What a brilliant challenge. Be the master of your bookshelf. I'm going to take that and I'm going to go away and have a look at my book. It won't surprise you, Lee. A lot of my bookshelf is probably by women, but I'm pretty sure I've got some men in there as well. So hopefully it's quite balanced. So we've got to our final question, and we've learned so much about your journey into adulthood. So thank you for sharing everything that you've shared, those ups and downs, those failures. I think one of the There's two things that I will definitely take away from our conversation today. One is there's a treasure in every failure or when it doesn't go your way, and failing at something doesn't make you a failure. And I think anybody listening can really benefit from that, because I think we all feel like that if something doesn't go the way that it's supposed to. And I'm a great believer in those things are the things that build us. They're the things that teach us something. As the final question and the beginner's guide to being a grown-up, if we turned that into a book that hopefully will be on someone's bookshelf one day, what's the one thing you would put into that guide that you think would benefit people the most?
Well, that's a great question as well. So I will play a nod to the fact that I've also published a book earlier this year called Momentum, and it's the 13 ways to unlock your potential. But I actually wanted to call it the 13 lessons, the 13 mistakes that I'd made that were mistakes that I learned the hard way that I wish I'd have known 20 years ago, but that's too long for a book title. And people say, why 13? That's such an unlucky number. And I'm like, why not 13? Because no one else is going to do that, are they? Mm-hmm. But you know, that is like the encapsulation of all the things that I'd wish I'd have known and that I've had to learn the hard way. And some of them, you know, I've heard across, you know, this podcast over the past 45 minutes. But no, I think that the one that really kind of sticks out for me is to embrace life squiggles. Like, we're so conditioned into having this linearity, this gradual kind of career ladder like life. And I just think the best moments in life come not on the main highway, but on all those really squiggly country roads where we can just take in the view. Sometimes those roads, we don't even get to the end of them. Sometimes they're blocked off. Sometimes they're just not the path that we need right now. But life is such an experiment, and we are the biggest experiment we'll ever undertake. So that curiosity, I've never lost that. You know, I'm still like a 7-year-old kid asking lots of questions and really annoying people. But yeah, just embrace those squiggles. Just appreciate that we're kind of being told this productive life is very quick in one direction. But actually slow down, explore, and look what's off the beaten path. Because so often that's where you actually learn about who you are, what you're capable of, what you can do. And you can then take that back onto the wider journey and realise that actually there's so much colour in a world that might feel black and white. And actually there are so many things that you don't even notice until you start to explore off that beaten track and realise there's a lot more to life than what you've been told or who you've been told you should be.
Embrace the squiggles. I think that is the perfect place to close out the podcast. Lee, thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your journey into adulthood, your ups and downs and your failures and your successes. It's been an absolute pleasure to interview today. Thank you for listening to the pod this week. Please do like, subscribe and follow wherever you get your podcasts. As you know, this is really important to us so we can know how many people are listening, how many people are interested in the pod. So please do. It does really help us track how we're doing. Next week, we're going to talk about money and how it was getting into money and understanding it was important in the journey of Lisa Conway Hughes. So please do join us next week to hear her story. In the meantime, enjoy being a grown-up.